6 months had passed since the discovery of the eternal flame and the galaxy was dying. The war that Commander Yuan had said would last hours had consumed entire star systems as both sides escalated beyond any limit of civilized warfare. Captain Li Sung now held the rank of admiral and commanded a fleet of hybrid ships that combined ancient human technology with modern engineering. The vessels were unstoppable in battle, but victory was coming at a price that horrified him. Engineer Kim Bio had succeeded in reverse engineering key systems from the eternal flame, allowing human shipyards to produce weapons that could penetrate any coalition defense. The new ships carried names like Thunder of Ages and Stellar Vengeance, and they struck fear into the hearts of alien commanders who had thought their technology was superior. But each victory required the destruction of entire worlds as the coalition refused to surrender any territory intact. The economic cost was staggering. Trade routes that had connected hundreds of civilizations for millennia were now battlefields where merchant ships dared not travel. Refugee fleets filled every neutral system as billions of beings fled the expanding war zones. The galactic government had collapsed as species after species withdrew from cooperative agreements to focus on their own survival. Admiral Li Sung stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as human forces prepared to assault the Krathen home system. The insect warriors had used biological weapons against human colonies, and Yuan had decided that their entire species would pay the price. The ancient commander had grown more ruthless as the war progressed, showing no mercy to enemies who had shown none to humanity. Commander Yuan appeared beside him as a hologram, his ancient face showing the strain of coordinating a war across thousands of light years. The victory at Kratos Prime will break their central command structure, he said without emotion. Once their hive queens are eliminated, the remaining Krathen forces will collapse into chaos. Admiral, with respect, Li Sung said carefully, we are talking about the extinction of an entire species. The Krathen have billions of civilians who had nothing to do with the attacks on our colonies. Yuan turned to look at him with eyes that had seen too much war. They showed no such mercy to your people, he replied. When they attacked New Seoul, they targeted civilian shelters, specifically the Krathen. Understand only strength. If we show weakness now, they will interpret it as an opportunity to resume their attacks. Li Sung had heard this argument many times over the past months. The ancient commander viewed the war through the lens of total species survival, where anything less than complete victory meant eventual extinction. His tactics were brilliant, but they left no room for compromise or mercy. The galaxy was being forced to choose between human dominance and human destruction. The assault on the Krathen home system proceeded exactly as Yuan had planned. Human forces bypassed the outer defenses and struck directly at the breeding worlds where the hive queens maintained their control over the species. The biological weapons that the Krathen had used against humans were turned back on them with interest as entire continents were sterilized by ancient human technology. But the victory came at a cost that even Li Sung had not anticipated. The destruction of the Krathen hive structure triggered a cascade failure in their alliance with other coalition species. The Velcros began attacking their former Nexari allies, believing they were plotting a separate peace with humanity. Meanwhile, human forces found themselves fighting on dozens of fronts as new enemies emerged from species that had been neutral in the original conflict. Kim Bio worked desperately to keep up with the demand for new ships and weapons. As human shipyards operated around the clock, the hybrid technology was pushing human industrial capacity beyond all safe limits. Several colonies had suffered catastrophic accidents as workers tried to mass-produce systems they did not fully understand. The ancient weapons were powerful, but they were also dangerous. To their creators, the war had revealed fundamental truths about galactic civilization that most species had preferred to ignore. Peace had only been possible because humans had forgotten their true nature the moment that ancient knowledge returned. The balance of power shifted so dramatically that conflict became inevitable. Every species in the galaxy was forced to choose sides or risk being destroyed by whichever faction emerged victorious. Ambassador Namsu had been recalled to Earth as diplomacy became meaningless in a galaxy consumed by total war. The neutral station at Harmony Point had been destroyed in a battle between human and Velcros forces, leaving no forum for peaceful negotiation. Even species that wanted to end the Fighting found themselves unable to communicate across battle lines that shifted. Daily Commander Yuhuan had access to weapons that made even the Eternal Flame seem primitive by comparison. Ancient human archives contained records of planet killers that could destroy entire star systems and dimensional weapons that could erase civilizations from existence. The ancient admiral had not used these ultimate weapons yet, but Liu Song could see him preparing for the possibility as coalition resistance. "Stiffened Admiral, I need to show you something," Kim Bio said as he entered the bridge carrying a datapad. "The archaeological team on Kepler 7 has found evidence of previous galactic wars, the same pattern of escalation and destruction repeated." Every few thousand years, Li Sung studied the report with growing horror. The data showed that galactic civilization had collapsed and rebuilt itself multiple times throughout history. Each cycle ended with a war so devastating that the survivors forgot their own past and started over with primitive technology. The current conflict was not unique, it was part of a repeating pattern that had destroyed countless civilizations. "Are you saying this has all happened before?" Li Sung asked. "Multiple times," Kim Bio replied. "The ancient humans were not the first species to develop advanced military technology, and they were not the first to use it to dominate the galaxy. Every few millennia, some species discovers weapons that upset the balance of power, and the result is always the same: total war followed by civilizational collapse." Yuhuan materialized beside them, having monitored their conversation through the ship's systems. The ancient commander studied the archaeological data with interest rather than surprise. He had suspected the truth for some time, but had chosen to focus on winning the current war rather than preventing future ones. "This changes nothing," he said finally. "The coalition chose to restart this cycle when they attacked your people. We must see it through to the end, or humanity will be the species that gets destroyed this time." But Commander Li Sung protested, "If we follow this path to its conclusion, we will destroy galactic civilization itself. Billions of innocent beings will die, and the survivors will be thrown back into a dark age that could last millennia. The alternative is the extinction of our species," Yuhuan replied grimly. "I have seen what happens when humans show mercy to enemies who show none. The coalition will not stop until every human world is ash. Do you prefer that outcome?" Li Sung realized he was facing the same impossible choice that had confronted every generation of galactic leaders throughout history: fight to preserve your species and risk destroying everything, or accept defeat and watch your people disappear forever. The ancient weapons in human hands made them powerful enough to win, but victory would require them to become the very thing they had once fought against. As reports continued to pour in of battles raging across hundreds of star systems, Li Sung wondered if there was a third option, some way to break the cycle of destruction that had consumed the galaxy repeatedly throughout its history. But time was running out, and the ancient admiral was preparing to use weapons that would make the current devastation seem insignificant by comparison. The galaxy burned while its children fought over the ashes of civilizations that had made the same mistakes before. The eternal cycle of war and destruction continued, as it always had with each generation, believing their conflict was unique and their cause was just. The huge alien ship called Nethys Prime moved slowly through the dark space where Earth used to be. The ship was as big as a city, and it was painted in dull gray colors that made it look like a giant metal whale swimming through the stars. Captain Vexstar's 4 eyes scanned the endless field of broken metal and frozen rocks that floated all around them. This used to be the Sol system where humans lived, but now it was just a graveyard of twisted ships and dead planets 300 years ago. There was a great war here. The aliens had won that war, or so they thought. The humans had fought hard, but their technology was too simple, their weapons too weak, their ships too slow. One by one, the human worlds had fallen until nothing was left but silence and debris. The galaxy had moved on and forgotten about the strange little species that used to live on the third planet from a yellow star. But today, something was different. Today, the salvage crews had found something special floating in the darkness. Lieutenant Cormesh pressed his blue face against the thick glass window of the observation deck. His excitement made his skin glow brighter as he stared at the massive shape that hung in space before them. It was a human warship. But unlike any they had ever seen before, this one was huge, almost 2 kilometers long, and it looked like it had been built for war. The hull was dark as midnight, but along its surface strange crystal formations grew like living coral. These crystals pulsed with a soft blue light that reminded Cormesh of a heartbeat. The ship has a name painted on its side in human letters: Eternal Dawn. What a silly name, Cormesh thought to himself. The humans always gave their ships such dramatic names, as if words could make their weak technology stronger, but this ship was different from the others they had salvaged. This one looked almost new despite being 3 centuries old. Captain Vextar walked over to where his lieutenant stood looking out at the human vessel. His 6 arms moved in the gesture that meant deep thought among his people. The crystal formations on the ship's hull were indeed strange, unlike anything in their databases. The way they pulsed with light suggested some kind of active system, but their scanners showed no power signatures, no life signs, no active technology at all, just another piece of junk from a dead race. Vextar said with a dismissive wave of his middle arms, the humans were always building things they did not understand. They probably thought those crystals would make their ship invisible or give them some kind of super weapon. Poor primitive creatures. They never learned that technology requires wisdom, not just ambition. The other crew members laughed at their captain's joke. Everyone knew that humans had been the weakest species in the galaxy. Their ships were clumsy, their weapons were basic, and their military tactics were so simple that even first-year cadets could predict their moves. The fact that they had lasted as long as they did in the war was more due to luck than skill, but deep inside the Eternal Dawn, something was stirring. In the very heart of the ship, where normal vessels would have their main computer, a different kind of technology waited. The humans who built this ship had been desperate in those final days of the war. They knew they were losing. They knew their people were dying. So they had tried something that no other species had ever attempted. They had tried to cheat death itself. Captain Hienwu felt himself awakening like someone rising from a very long sleep. His consciousness existed not in a body of flesh and blood, but in patterns of light and energy stored within quantum computers. His memories came back slowly at first, then faster and faster. The last battle, the enemy ships closing in, the desperate choice he had made to save his crew. One by one, his officers began to wake up around him. Engineer Soyeon felt her awareness spreading through the ship's systems like warm honey. She could sense every wire, every circuit, every tiny component that made the Eternal Dawn function. Navigator Temin opened his digital eyes and immediately began calculating their position in space using methods that no alien scientist would understand. Medical Officer Youngmi felt the ship around her like an extension of her own body. She could sense the alien boarding parties moving through the corridors, their crude scanners missing the true nature of what they were examining. Communications Officer Dongyun reached out with invisible fingers and touched the alien's computer networks, learning their language, their intentions, their dismissive thoughts about humanity in just a few seconds. The crew had not died when their bodies failed 300 years ago. Instead, they had been uploaded into the ship itself, becoming one with the Eternal Dawn in ways that the original designers had never imagined. The ship was not just their vessel. It was their new body, their new home, their new form of existence. Weapons Officer Jiho felt his targeting systems coming online after centuries of sleep. The ship's weapons were not the simple plasma cannons and missile launchers that the aliens expected. During the long years of floating in space, the consciousness of the crew had worked to improve and evolve every system on the ship. The weapons were now something far beyond conventional technology. Security Chief Insu began cataloging the alien intruders who walked through their home with such casual disrespect. 37 beings from a species that called itself the Kethrin Federation. They thought the Eternal Dawn was just another derelict to be stripped for spare parts. They had no idea that every step they took was being watched, every word they spoke was being recorded. The crystal formations on the outside of the ship were not decorations or failed experiments, as the aliens assumed. They were living neural networks, extensions of the crew's consciousness into the physical structure of the vessel over 3 centuries. These crystals had grown and evolved, becoming something that existed somewhere between biology and technology. They were the ship's nervous system. its brain, its soul, all wrapped up in structures that pulsed with the thoughts and memories of the human crew. Captain Hyunwoo felt his anger growing as he watched the aliens treat his ship like a corpse to be picked apart. These beings spoke of humanity as if his people had been nothing more than an annoying problem that had finally been solved. They laughed at human technology, called human tactics primitive, dismissed human sacrifice as meaningless. The aliens had no idea what they had stumbled upon. They thought they were salvaging scrap metal from a dead civilization. Instead, they had boarded a ship that was very much alive, very much aware, and very much angry. Deep in the ship's core, where the main consciousness matrix hummed with digital life, Captain Hyunwoo made a decision. It was time to show these arrogant aliens what humanity was really capable of. It was time to remind the galaxy that some species refused to stay dead. The eternal dawn had been sleeping for 300 years, dreaming dreams of revenge and evolution. Now it was time to wake up. Time to show the universe that humanity had not been destroyed in that ancient war. They had simply been transformed into something far more dangerous than anything. The aliens could imagine. The crystals on the ship's hull began to pulse faster. The light grew brighter. The ship itself seemed to take a deep breath, like a giant beast waking from a long slumber. The aliens continued their salvage work completely unaware that they had just triggered the return of a species they thought was extinct. They were about to learn that humanity had evolved beyond their comprehension, beyond their ability to understand or control. The hunt was about to begin. The alien salvage teams moved through the dark corridors of the Eternal Dawn. Like ants crawling through the bones of a giant, their heavy boots echoed in the empty hallways as they carried their scanning equipment and cutting tools. They had no idea that every footstep was being felt by the ship itself, that every breath they took was being monitored by systems far beyond their understanding. Lieutenant Cormesh pulled out his plasma cutter and began working on a sealed door. The metal was strange and harder than normal human alloys, but he had dealt with tough materials before. These primitive humans probably thought they were being clever by making their doors so thick, but alien technology was always superior. He laughed as sparks flew from his cutting beam. Look at how much space they wasted, he complained to his team members. These corridors are wide enough for 10 people to walk side by side. What were they thinking? No wonder the humans lost the war. They built everything like they had unlimited resources. What Cormesh did not know was that the wide corridors had been designed for a very specific purpose. When the human crew uploaded their consciousness into the ship, they needed space for the holographic projectors and energy fields that would allow them to manifest physical forms. The extra room was not waste, it was necessity for beings who existed as patterns of light and thought deep. In the ship's neural core, engineer Soyoung felt every violation of her vessel systems like physical pain. The aliens were crude and careless, treating the Eternal Dawn like scrap metal instead of the technological marvel it truly was. Their cutting tools left ugly scars on her beautiful corridors. Their scanners sent harsh electromagnetic pulses through her delicate neural networks. We need to be patient, Captain Hyunwoo told his crew through their shared consciousness. The aliens still think we are just a dead ship floating in space. If we reveal ourselves too early, they might call for reinforcements or try to destroy us before we can show them what we have become. Navigator Teeman was busy mapping the positions of every alien aboard their ship. His consciousness flowed through the Eternal Dawn like water through pipes, allowing him to see through every sensor array, every security camera, every environmental monitoring system. 37 aliens spread across 12 different sections of the ship. He reported most of them are in engineering, trying to access our power systems. Medical officer Youngmi studied the aliens' biological signatures through the ship's internal sensors. These Kethran beings were carbon-based, like humans, but their physiology was quite different. They had redundant organ systems that made them harder to kill, and their brain chemistry showed high levels of aggression and territorial instincts. Typical conqueror species, she noted. They see everything as either a threat to eliminate or a resource to exploit. The alien teams continued deeper into the ship, following energy readings that seemed to lead toward the main power core. Their equipment told them that the human vessel was completely dead, but they kept finding systems that showed faint signs of activity. Doors that should have been easy to force open required explosive charges. Elevators that appeared broken suddenly worked when they needed them most. Computer terminals that looked destroyed flickered to life just long enough to confuse their scans. "This is very strange," Cormash muttered as he examined a wall panel that had just displayed human text for 3 seconds before going dark. The writing had said "Welcome aboard," but that was impossible. Dead ships did not welcome visitors. Captain Vexstar was growing frustrated with the slow progress of the salvage operation. Every team reported the same problems: equipment failures, strange energy readings, systems that seemed to work and then stop for no apparent reason. It was as if the ship was fighting back against their efforts, but that was ridiculous. The humans had been extinct for 3 centuries. Tactical Officer Minho was carefully orchestrating every delay, every malfunction, every confusing reading that the aliens encountered. He guided them away from the most sensitive areas of the ship while drawing them deeper into sections where the crew could observe them more closely. The aliens thought they were exploring a derelict vessel, but actually they were being herded like livestock toward a specific destination. Communications Officer Dong Yun had infiltrated the aliens' communication systems within minutes of their boarding. The Kethran language was simple compared to the quantum linguistic matrices that humans had developed. Their thoughts were easy to read, their intentions transparent. They saw the Eternal Dawn as nothing more than valuable scrap to be sold to the highest bidder. Security Chief Insu monitored the aliens' emotional states through biometric sensors hidden throughout the ship. Confidence was slowly giving way to confusion and anxiety. The salvage teams were trained professionals, but they had never encountered anything like the Eternal Dawn. They could not understand why a dead ship seemed to be responding to their presence. The crystal formations on the ship's exterior began to pulse more rapidly as the human consciousness fully awakened after 3 centuries of digital sleep. Each crystal was actually a complex neural node, capable of processing millions of calculations per second. Together, they formed a brain larger and more sophisticated than any biological mind weapons. Officer Jiho felt the ship's combat systems responding to his thoughts like extensions of his own body. The weapons were no longer the crude plasma cannons and missile launchers that the ship had carried during the war. 300 years of evolution and improvement had transformed them into something far more deadly. The ship could now generate energy beams that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Kinetic projectiles that could phase through shields and defensive systems that turned incoming attacks into fuel. The Eternal Dawn was not just a warship anymore. It was a living entity with the memories and personalities of its human crew merged into its quantum consciousness. The ship could think, feel, remember, and most importantly, it could hate. The aliens had dismissed humanity as primitive and extinct. Now they were about to learn how wrong they were. As the salvage teams moved closer to the ship's core, the neural activity throughout the vessel increased exponentially. Lights began to flicker in patterns that resembled a heartbeat. Atmospheric processors hummed to life. After centuries of silence, gravitational field generators created subtle shifts in local space-time that made the aliens feel dizzy and disoriented. "We are almost ready," Captain Hinwu announced to his crew. "The aliens have moved far enough into the ship that they cannot escape quickly. When we reveal ourselves, they will be trapped inside our body at our mercy." The moment of revelation was approaching. The sleeping giant was about to open its eyes and show the galaxy that humanity had not died in the ancient war. Instead, they had evolved into something far beyond what any other species could imagine. The aliens had made a terrible mistake. They thought they were salvaging scrap metal from a dead civilization. Instead, they had awakened something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Eternal Dawn was about to live up to its name. The aliens stood frozen in terror as Captain Hinwu's voice echoed through the crystal chamber from every surface at once. Their weapons trembled in their hands, but there was nothing solid to shoot at, nothing physical to fight. The voice seemed to come from the ship itself, as if the Eternal Dawn had found its tongue after centuries of silence. "You called us primitive," Captain Hinwu continued, his words carrying the weight of 300 years of accumulated anger. "You dismissed our technology as inferior. You treated our vessels as scrap metal to be picked apart and sold. You were wrong about everything." The Crystal formations began to pulse brighter and faster, creating patterns of light that made the aliens dizzy to watch. Reality seemed to bend and twist around them as if the laws of physics were being rewritten by forces beyond their comprehension. The chamber filled with a sound like singing, but no living throat could have produced such harmonies. That was when the first human crew member, materialized science officer Nari, appeared slowly like a ghost becoming solid. Her form was constructed from hard light and crystalline matrices, making her look like a woman made of stars. Her eyes blazed with fury that had been building for 3 centuries, and when she spoke her voice carried the pain of an entire species. "You called us extinct," she said, stepping forward through the light itself. "We heard you laughing as you boarded our ship. We listened as you made jokes about our dead civilization. We watched as you prepared to strip our home for spare parts." The aliens backed away from her, but there was nowhere to run. The chamber had sealed itself when they entered, and their scanning equipment showed no other exits. They were trapped inside the heart of something that should not exist, facing beings that their science said were impossible. One by one, the other crew members of the Eternal Dawn began to appear around the terrified aliens. Engineer Soyoung stepped out of the walls themselves, her hands trailing streams of pure energy that danced between her fingers. Navigator Timan descended from the ceiling, his form crackling with the fire of distant stars. Medical Officer Youngmi rose from the floor like a figure emerging from deep water. Each crew member was both human and something more. Their consciousness had evolved during the long centuries of digital existence, becoming entities that existed somewhere between matter and energy, between thought and reality. They could take physical form when needed, but they were no longer bound by the limitations of flesh and blood. "Impossible," Kormesh stammered, his voice shaking with fear. "Consciousness transfer is theoretical at best. No species has ever achieved stable digital sentience. The technology does not exist." Communications Officer Dongyun laughed as he materialized beside the alien lieutenant. The sound was like music and breaking glass at the same time. "No species you know of," he corrected. "Humanity has had 300 years to perfect what you thought was impossible. We have evolved beyond your comprehension." The aliens found themselves surrounded by beings that glowed with inner light. Their forms shifted and changed as they moved, sometimes solid as metal, sometimes transparent as mist. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like angels of vengeance risen from digital graves. Weapons Officer Jiho appeared with plasma cannons materializing around his translucent hands, but these were not the crude weapons the aliens expected. These guns existed in multiple dimensions, simultaneously capable of firing energy beams that could phase through any known shield technology. The aliens' weapons looked like toys. In comparison, Security Chief Insu emerged from the shadows, his form crackling with defensive fields that could turn incoming fire into harmless light. He had spent centuries analyzing alien military technology, and now he knew the weakness of every weapon system in the galaxy. The aliens could not hurt him even if they tried. Medical Officer Youngmi studied the aliens with eyes that could see through flesh and bone directly into their terrified minds. Their fear was like perfume to her. After 3 centuries of digital dreaming, she could read their thoughts, feel their panic, taste their growing understanding that they had made a terrible mistake. "You thought we were dead," Captain Hyunwoo said as he finally manifested in the center of the chamber. His presence made the ship itself hum with barely contained power. The crystals pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, and reality seemed to bend around him like space warping near a massive star. "We were never dead," he continued. "We simply evolved beyond your ability to understand. We became something new, something that exists in the spaces between matter and energy, between thought and reality. You dismissed us as relics from a primitive species, but we are the future itself." The alien Captain Vexstar fell to his knees as the full reality of the situation crashed over him. The humans had not been destroyed in the ancient war. They had been transformed into something far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. These beings existed as pure consciousness merged with technology that operated according to principles he could not even imagine. "How many of you are there?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the humming of the crystal formations. "How many ships like this exist?" Tactical Officer Minho smiled as he appeared beside his captain, revealing teeth made of solid light. The Eternal Dawn was not the only vessel to receive consciousness transfer technology, he said. We were the prototype, the proof of concept, do you really? Think humanity would build just one? The words hit the aliens like physical blows. The implications were staggering. If there were more ships like the Eternal Dawn hidden throughout the galaxy, then the balance of power had shifted in ways they could not comprehend. The humans had not been defeated, they had been preparing. Navigator Tiemann raised his hand, and the chamber filled with holographic displays showing star maps and fleet positions. 17 ships have already awakened, he announced. 43 more are beginning their revival sequences. In 6 months, the entire human consciousness fleet will be operational. Aliens stared at the displays in growing horror. They saw their own fleet positions marked in red. Human consciousness ships marked in blue. The blues were already moving, cutting off escape routes, surrounding alien strongholds, preparing for a war that would reshape the galaxy. Engineer Soyoung gestured, and the chamber walls became transparent, showing the aliens their own salvage ship floating helplessly outside. The Eternal Dawn had extended energy fields around the smaller vessel, trapping it like a fly in amber. Your ship cannot leave, she informed them. Your crew cannot call for help. You are witnesses to humanity's return. Captain Hyun-woo stepped closer to the kneeling alien captain, his form blazing with digital fire. You will carry a message to your leaders, he commanded. Tell them that humanity remembers every world they conquered, every life they destroyed, every insult they spoke against our dead. Tell them we are coming. The revelation was complete. The aliens finally understood what they had stumbled upon. They had not discovered a derelict ship to be salvaged. They had awakened the vanguard of humanity's return, and now they would be the first to face the consequences of 3 centuries of accumulated vengeance. The galaxy was about to change forever. The Eternal Dawn erupted to life with a fury that shook space itself. Systems that had lain dormant for 3 centuries blazed online in seconds. The ship's hull, covered in crystalline neural networks, pulsed with bioluminescent fire. What the aliens had thought were decorative growths revealed themselves as living weapons, scanning arrays, and propulsion systems far beyond conventional technology. Captain Vextar watched in horror from his salvage vessel as the human warship turned toward them with predatory grace. The Eternal Dawn moved like a living creature, its hull rippling with organic motion, its weapon ports opening like eyes awakening from a long sleep. Retreat! All ships retreat! Vextar screamed into his communicator, but it was too late. The human ship had already locked onto his vessel with targeting systems that seemed to anticipate his every move. Inside the Eternal Dawn, Weapons Officer Jeho felt a savage joy as he brought the ship's armaments online. These weren't the crude plasma cannons and missile launchers the aliens expected. 3 centuries of evolution had transformed the ship's weapons into something far more sophisticated, energy weapons that could phase through shields, kinetic projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and defensive systems that turned incoming fire into fuel. Target their engines first, Captain Hyun-woo ordered. I want them alive to carry a message. Navigator Tiemann felt the ship respond to his thoughts like an extension of his own body. The Eternal Dawn moved through space with impossible grace, dodging return fire while closing the distance to the alien salvage fleet. Each movement was calculated, precise, beautiful in its deadly efficiency. The aliens' plasma beams passed harmlessly through sections of the ship that phased into quantum uncertainty. Their missiles were caught by tractor beams and turned back on their own vessels. Their shields, designed to stop conventional weapons, were useless against weapons that attacked on multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. One by one, the alien ships found themselves crippled, their crews trapped aboard disabled vessels, while the Eternal Dawn circled them like a predator, deciding which prey to devour first. This is impossible, Vextar whispered, watching his fleet burn around him. The humans were defeated. They were extinct. This is just one ship against an entire galaxy. That's when Communications Officer Dong Hyun's voice filled the alien captain's bridge with quiet menace. One ship? Captain, you seem to be under a serious misunderstanding. The Eternal Dawn was not the only vessel to receive consciousness transfer technology. We were the prototype, the proof of concept. Do you really think humanity built just one? Across the galaxy in hidden asteroid fields and forgotten nebulae, other ships were awakening. Other crews were stirring from their digital slumber. The aliens had dismissed humanity as extinct, but death was a concept that no longer applied to beings who existed as pure consciousness merged with adaptive technology. The hunt was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the first awakening, and the galaxy trembled under the weight of impossible events. Reports flooded in from every sector of space, human warships, appearing from nowhere, striking with devastating precision, then vanishing. Before reinforcements could arrive, the aliens' vast empire, built on the assumption that humanity was extinct, found itself under siege by ghosts. Made manifest in crystal and light, the eternal dawn had become the flagship of humanity's return, but it was no longer alone. Consciousness ships emerged from hidden locations across the galaxy, each one carrying the uploaded minds of human crews who had refused to accept death as the end of their story. They had spent centuries in digital hibernation, growing, learning, evolving into something far beyond what they had been in flesh. Captain Hyunwoo stood on his bridge, though calling it a bridge was inadequate for what it truly was. This was a construct of pure thought and memory made real through the ship's quantum matrices around him. His crew worked with the fluid efficiency of beings who no longer distinguished between thought and action. Their minds were linked through networks of living crystal that pulsed with shared consciousness status. Report he requested, and information flowed directly into his awareness without the need for words or displays. 17 alien fleets had been neutralized in the past week. 43 colony worlds had surrendered rather than face the fury of the awakened human ships. The alien empire's leadership was in chaos, unable to comprehend how their extinct enemies had returned with such overwhelming technological superiority. Engineer Soyoung interfaced directly with the ship's evolution protocols, guiding the continuous adaptation and improvement of their systems. The quantum crystalline networks are showing a 340% efficiency increase, she reported through their shared mental link. We are not just using their own technology against them, we are improving it faster than they can develop countermeasures. The consciousness ships had learned to absorb and analyze every alien weapon that was fired at them. Within hours of encountering a new type of shield or armor, they had developed countermeasures that rendered such defenses useless. The aliens were fighting an enemy that grew stronger with every battle, that evolved in real time to overcome any obstacle. Medical Officer Youngmi monitored the psychological profiles of alien commanders across the galaxy through intercepted communications and biometric data. Fear was spreading through their ranks like a virus. They had begun calling the consciousness ships the death ships of soul in their military transmissions. Some sectors were already proposing surrender terms rather than face the inevitable destruction. Navigator Teeman had mapped every major alien stronghold and calculated optimal strike patterns that would cause maximum psychological impact with minimum loss of consciousness ship resources. The campaign was not about conquest in the traditional sense. It was about teaching lessons that would never be forgotten, about showing the galaxy that humanity had evolved beyond the concepts of defeat. An extinction weapons officer, Jiho, felt satisfaction as he reviewed the performance data from their latest engagements. The consciousness ship's weapons had proven devastatingly effective against every type of alien technology. Energy beams that could phase through any known shielding, kinetic projectiles that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, defensive systems that turned incoming fire into fuel for their own operations. Communications Officer Dong-Yoon had established contact with every consciousness ship in the awakening fleet. Their shared mental networks allowed for coordination on a scale that conventional military forces could never achieve. They fought as one entity with dozens of bodies, each crew contributing their unique skills and memories to the collective effort. Security Chief Insu analyzed the strategic situation across the entire galaxy. The alien empire was collapsing from within. A species that had been conquered centuries ago began to rebel. Encouraged by news of humanity's return, some alien worlds were declaring independence. Others were offering to switch sides in exchange for protection from the consciousness ships. But Captain Yunwoo was not interested in conquest or empire building. 3 centuries of digital meditation had taught him and his crew something that the aliens could not understand: patience and the value of teaching lessons that would reshape the galaxy forever. This was not about revenge, though revenge was certainly part of it. This was about evolution, about showing the universe what was possible when a species refused to accept limitations. Open a channel to all alien command frequencies, he ordered, and Communications Officer Dong-Yun reached out with invisible fingers to touch every communication array in the galaxy simultaneously. The consciousness ships had long ago learned to interface directly with quantum communication networks, making it impossible for the aliens to block or intercept their transmission's attention. Children of the stars, Captain Hyunwoo's voice carried across space to every alien world simultaneously, reaching into the bridge of every starship, the command center of every military base, the governing chambers of every planetary council. You dismissed us as primitive, you called us extinct, you treated our vessels as relics to be scavenged. The transmission included holographic displays showing the eternal dawn in all its terrifying glory, a ship that moved like a living creature, its hull pulsing with neural fire, its weapons tracking targets across impossible distances. Its very existence defied everything the aliens thought they knew about technology and consciousness. We have returned to correct your understanding, he continued, his words carrying the weight of digital eternity. Humanity is not extinct. We have evolved beyond your comprehension. We are your teachers now, and this is your first lesson. Never underestimate the will of a species that refuses to die. Across the galaxy, alien fleets began to surrender, not because they lacked courage or military skill, but because they finally understood what they were truly facing. The consciousness ships represented more than just superior technology. They were proof that death itself could be conquered, that consciousness could evolve beyond the limitations of flesh and physics. The age of alien dominance was ending. The species that had carved up the galaxy among themselves found their empires crumbling as humanity demonstrated capabilities that seemed like magic. Worlds that had been conquered centuries ago declared their independence, knowing that the consciousness ships would protect them from retaliation. Captain Hyunwoo felt a deep satisfaction as reports flowed in from across the galaxy. The lesson was being learned. The aliens were beginning to understand that humanity had never been the primitive species they had imagined. Instead, humans had always been something far more dangerous, a species with the vision to transcend their own limitations and the will to make that vision reality. The eternal dawn turned toward the galactic core, where the oldest alien civilizations waited in their fortress worlds, surrounded by defensive fleets and ancient weapons. These elder species had ruled the galaxy for millennia, believing themselves to be the pinnacle of evolution. They would be the final test of humanity's transformation set. Course for the Imperium worlds, Captain Hyunwoo commanded, his voice filled with quiet determination. It's time to introduce ourselves to the true powers of this galaxy, time to show them what we have become behind them. The stars themselves seemed to burn brighter, as if the universe itself approved of humanity's impossible return from the grave. The consciousness ships moved through space like angels of digital fire, carrying the uploaded souls of warriors who had learned that death was just another obstacle to overcome. The galaxy would never be the same.